And so we're going to look at what's going on below ground and look at the turf a little bit, the different grasses. You can probably see on this screen it really shows up how patchy it is. Most of the problems that you have at a golf course, your golf course, can usually be tagged right back to the growing environment. It's always a growing condition situation normally. Your management can affect that, but if you're growing grass and shade, or if you don't have the proper drainage, your root zone, is compacted, you don't get the rooting depth, you're going to have issues. It's going to come back to haunt you. So this is a modern style green. It's not that old. We're going to go down below. There's a greens aerator, and Kevin just aerated the green probably last Monday or Tuesday, and did a good job filling the holes. But this is a USGA style green. That's the profile. The root zone mix, if it's built right, should be about 12 inches. You can hear the gravel. So that's a USGA green. Ideally should be a uniform 12 plus or minus 2 inches across the entire green. So whether you have a high contour or here we're in a little bit lower contour, we got to keep the depth of that mix consistent. And then there's a gravel layer, so all the water works its way down the sand, hits the gravel layer, and then starts moving horizontally more so in the gravel. Then there's a series of drain lines below that, so water just kind of finds its way into a drain line and off the green. Any green, and you'll see the better old greens that are 100 years old, and typically those that are still in existence have been built properly. Again, whether it's native soil or sand, but they all have good surface drainage. They get great growing environments, but you'll see that the water runs off. Preferably 3 directions, but 2 is okay. The other problem this winter with greens with bad surface drainage, took it pretty hard with the winter. Any areas where water pockets, typically had some ice accumulation, ice encasement, and those turf areas were hurt. So this is a USGA green, some pigments, that's why you see the green. And if you look in this profile, guys, this is kind of interesting. Can you see the sand vein in here? Yeah. That's a different type of aeration. You don't usually see it done on sand greens. So they feel there must be some problems with the root zone. They're not getting the water movement through there. So what we're looking for is just how much thatch is in here, the depth of the roots. They're actually not that bad. Problem with the practice green is it's probably getting more traffic than any other green is, and look at the size of this. So this is under a lot of pressure. Not very much thatch. I'm here to show you some organic matter, and honestly, it might be one of the issues with this green. I don't see any organic, very little organic matter in here.
So you should have some organic?
You should see some body that pulls it together, that protects it from the traffic. Organic matter, good question. As the plant grows, develops roots and other parts of the plant. And that cycles out. Some of that tissue dies, and it gets replaced by new tissue. Well, that tissue, if it has some lignin in the tissue, it doesn't break down very quickly. So it accumulates in that upper inch of the soil profile. If you get too much organic matter, it'll hold water. And when it starts to hold water, your surfaces get softer. The grass is softer, it just won't take the foot traffic as well. Issues with green speed. So what this was, the aeration in a sand-based green, core aeration, you can see these are 1/2 inch holes. Extract the core, you pull that out, pull the thatch out with it, and sand it to fill the holes to the surface. Did a really nice job of doing that. All this will fill in, it's probably seeded, and what you're shooting for is to try to come up with a nice homogeneous root zone without too much of a layer so the water moves through it. Golfers hate it, of course, because you're punching a hole and it takes a couple of weeks for these to recover. But if you've got too much organic material, or you have soil-based greens, which we'll look at right now, you do it to modify the soils and reduce some of the thatch. Then there's another management technique that we use underground for thatch, and it's actually top dressing. And sand top dressing is done, especially on sand-based greens, to manage the organic material in here. And it keeps your surfaces firm, and it's also a very important playability issue. Theoretically, if you top dress and you get everything in balance, it does reduce your dependency on some of the core aeration. It's some operations, but that's very rare, and I just don't see it that often. I've got 25 years, I've had probably a handful of clubs under very special circumstances that were able to top dress their way out of and manage their soils with top dressing. It was pretty impressive. The latest I would like to see, I mean, preferably would be into late August or the first 2 weeks of September here. But if you go later, you're just taking the risk. I mean, it's just going to be slower to heal. And the other problem with the late aeration, not only are they going to take a little longer to recover, but now this is the perfect time for annual bluegrass. So if you have bentgrass greens, the timing's even more critical if you want to keep the annual bluegrass out. If you have POA bent greens and you're not as worried and you're managing POA, then they're not as concerned with the timing except for the recovery. So if you're a golfer, you got to make that call and schedule how long. My concern with late fall aeration though is, when you aerate, it's a very positive thing, but you're taking a step back. You're punching holes, you're pulling roots out. Now, that plant's got to use a lot of energy just to recover, to
There's no
regrow.
time to do it.
And that plant at that point should be storing energy and using it to just make more roots and get ready, store sugars for the winter. That's what it uses to protect itself. So clubs that are aerating in October, I'm afraid that, then they might be getting banged up a little bit. They're not, but there's potential. Your energy's not there. Now, having said that, a winter like last, if you were in the middle of it, it didn't much matter what you did. You were going to get whacked. It was so severe last year. The flash freezes that we had early. We're going to go down to the 18th green, which is a typical New England push-up style green, native soil, modified with sand, no drainage. Into this area is the original soil. Then they top dressed and aerified and extracted cores and filled holes. And by doing that, they built up a pretty good layer of sand over the native soil. The native soil here is a loam. This is really good actually for native soil. It's beautiful. You can see this is the drill and fill operation. That's a machine that uses augers that goes down about 10 inches. It's a form of deep aeration. And they come in and they'll do that. That drops dry sand down into the hole, 9 inches deep. So at least you've got these channels for water to move through the green and to get down a little bit deeper. Top dressing frequently and regularly is going to start to build up that layer and dilute the thatch, and you're going to create a very well drained mix. If you have a USGA green or you have a soil-based green that has a really deep root system, you can get away with less frequent and a little bit heavier watering. And if you tend to be like a tough summer like we had last year where you've got all POA, your POA roots come up and they get very shallow, then you're going to do a lot more light frequent irrigation, or if you have nematodes, a pest problem. This is a good spot to look at bent and POA. But the bent grass is more of the leggy, that light blue color. It tends to want to creep. And the POA is the little bit tighter yellow-green color, so you see the patchiness of it all. And the bent grass, more durable plant. It can tolerate hotter temperatures, colder temperatures. It can tolerate ice cover. It has fewer pest problems. POA creates a beautiful playing surface. There's no doubt about it. It's tight, it's smooth when it rolls well, but it's just not that dependable, unfortunately, with the winter and even the summer heat stress. It gets a few diseases on it. Most golf courses in New England have to deal with a blend like this. It's going to be 40% POA, 60% POA, 40% bent. POA is the better grass in the shade. It competes more strongly and it can tolerate shade. This is called moisture meter. Push it down to the plate, hit a button, and it tells you what your moisture is in that layer. And that number is just a number. But if you do this on your own golf course, you develop a number that works for you, and the time of year it works for you. It might be anywhere from, for POA greens, 20%, 21%, 22%. It could be high teens, 18%. It's an eye-opener for a lot. It takes the guesswork out is all it does. It's more of a precise measurement.
Put this tool into their hand and I can tell them if it's 14%, get the hose into that area.
Sure.
And do a little work with it. And it works out very nicely.
It's a number thing. If you get comfortable with it and you can tell the guy if it's 14%, walk by it. If it's below 14, touch it up. And then you can even do a follow-up to see if they touched it up enough and make sure they can move on to the next putting green. The sun angle is not the same all year, and this is one of the mistakes that we can get into on a golf course. What you see in the spring is not going to be the same sun pattern that we have this time of year. the angle changes quite a bit. So the longest day of the year, in June, your sun rises at about 60 degrees, 58 to 60 degrees. So that means the sun's going to come up over that building. This time of year, actually in December, the sun's coming up way up over this way. It won't be, that's 120 in December, so it's probably popping up somewhere in this location right now. I rely on the compass, so I know I'm looking at this putting green. These are going to be issues. Now in some cases the sun will be under these, but there's a point when it's going to hurt you. Now what we look for, morning sun is critical for a couple of reasons. It dries out the green faster, and for photosynthesis, it's an important sun for the plant. That's when it starts to make its sugars for the day. So we want the early morning sun. Get the dew off and get these things warmed up earlier. One of the worst scenarios I see for greens are shaded in the morning till about 11 o'clock, and then what sun do they see? The hot afternoon, man, and they just, it's like an oven. They get baked out and they have a hard time. So I mentioned earlier if I was going to grow bent grass, but even POA, but if you're going to regrass greens, I have one qualification. You've got to have a minimum of 8 full hours of sun on that putting green a day. Preferably 10, and ideally all morning long. Now if we get a little 3 o'clock shade, beautiful. Cools it down, life is happy, the green's got all the sun it needed. Pine trees are much worse. Anything with eastern white pine, spruce trees, you get shade on those 12 months of the year at least. The maples, oaks, you drop some leaves in the fall, but honestly, greens turn right around. Problem greens have turned right around if you just get some sun on them. The other important part of it is air circulation. And you want to have open corridors. Now, our summer prevailing wind at most New England golf courses, southwest. So check your southwest corridor, and that's where you want your open wind. And just ending very quickly, if we don't have that, then that's typically a fan, something to get the air movement. If you can't do it naturally, you just try to get fans out.